Welcome to the Small Business Big Insights podcast. So excited to share this episode today. We've got some big insights from our very special guest, Barry McLoughlin, who shares with us some great insights about the power of communication to fuel your company. I invite you right now to subscribe to the podcast, or you're going to miss out on some of our great upcoming episodes. Also, give us a review on your podcast platform of choice. It really helps us spread the message. So today we're joined by Barry McLoughlin, and basically, Barry, how would you describe what you do?
Well, we call ourselves leadership communications consultants, which is perhaps a broader focus than just media trainer, media coach, because we started with that decades ago.
Right.
But really, more and more what we do, it's training leaders. And we say leaders at every level in the organization, meaning that if you're a leader of a unit, if you're a leader of the frontline staff, you have responsibilities a leader would have. How do you communicate effectively? Strategically, tactically, messaging, approach, interpersonal. All leaders have to be concerned about how they communicate. Actually, every small business owner is a leader. You're a leader of your own organization.
Yeah.
And so it is important to realize that the way you communicate, you're the kind of brand itself. You're part of the service delivery. And therefore, the way you communicate, it's either going to make us stronger and more loyal as a customer, or it's going to make us, oh gosh, if they're just the way he dealt with me, I wouldn't want to deal with him again. Whoa, even though the product could be great, but they didn't like the way you communicated. End of it.
Yeah.
So communications is not a nice to do, it's a must do.
I love it. Okay. Well, let's finish explaining exactly what Barry's background is for anybody who doesn't know Barry. He spent decades helping leaders and organizations communicate with clarity and impact, right? So with presentations, media interviews, high stakes situations. Barry's an author of award-winning Communicate with Power series and teaches at the University of Ottawa and Cape Breton University's MBA program. With degrees from Carleton and Harvard, plus a screenwriting certificate from UCLA. He brings an expertise in presentation, coaching, strategic communications, and crisis management to help leaders succeed. So what helps him especially valuable, or what's especially valuable, is for us as small business owners, is actually the ability to break down how to tell your story. Because all business owners have a story. And so you want to do it in a way that people actually listen. And so how to tell difficult situations to people, right? How to, without losing trust, of course, and how to inspire your team, because that's really what counts, right? And so Barry here is a leadership and communications consultant, and he's whispered in the ear of some of the best known leaders in our country and in the US. And so he's, again, an author, university instructor, and we're very, very lucky to have him here today. Appreciate it.
Well, Eric, thank you so much. That's a great introduction.
Yeah.
And most of it's true, which I think is just a real bonus here. Yeah, no, I'm really very pleased to be here. I don't often talk about the business of what we do.
Right.
It's not something that usually I get asked about. I get usually asked about the issues of the day or issues facing organizations. So this is kind of neat in a way for me, because it's really not territory I normally tread in public, but I'm quite happy to share with you whatever.
That's the juicy stuff.
Yeah, elements.
So how do you even get into this line of work? Because this is a very unique kind of niche kind of thing. What's the story here?
Well, the brief story is I began as a comic impressionist, which is, in high school, I would do comic impressions. I would impersonate politicians of the day, showbiz people of the day in concerts and to be in high school, and moved from there into really performing in Yuck Yucks and other clubs, and worked with a lot of top people over the years. I wasn't probably in their league. I definitely wouldn't be in their league, but I would certainly learn and watch and realize that, even doing stand-up comedy, they say, dying is easy, comedy is hard. So it can be. And I got into television with my then writing partner, Ken Shaw, who went on for decades as the anchor of CTV News Toronto. Yeah. And he and I cooked up together a television series called Shh, It's the News, which was a news satire show of the day. So it'd be like a fake newscast.
Yeah.
So we wrote that, we helped produce it, we performed in it. In fact, we got to meet Mike Myers a couple of years ago, and I told him we had done Shit's the News here in Ottawa. And he goes, Shit's the News. He said, I was a 15-year-old kid living in a high-rise in Scarborough, and I would never miss an episode of It's the News. So it was just a great thing that, you don't know who's watching you, right?
Yeah, that's true.
We did 78 episodes, which in those years was 2 seasons. So you're doing 39 weekly episodes per year.
Yeah.
And so I did other type of TV shows again. I had a stint in Hollywood, wrote the Mary Tyler Moore Show.
Okay.
They never wrote back, but no, it was actually Mary Tyler Moore Variety Hour, and we did comedy sketches for them. So, but in the end, though, all during that, I knew I don't want to make this my life career. This was a great thing to do, a lot of learning, a lot of fun, a lot of laughs. But what happened was I was asked by a local college, would you train our fledgling broadcasters in how to communicate on camera? Oh, okay, because they'd seen our television shows. So Ken taught one cohort, I taught another. At the end of that first semester, he said, I don't really enjoy this very much. I said, I love it. So I took over his cohort, and I realized I loved coaching people how to communicate. And that began because MPs heard about it, heads of agencies heard about it. Right. Next thing you know, I'm doing that for others and realizing I think there's a future in that. And that's how it began.
Well, it sounds like fun. Wow. And I guess because you have so much experience talking to so many different leaders, business owners, and organization leaders, I guess what do you feel has been one of the biggest mistakes that people do in their communication?
Great question, actually. Yeah, well, I think they have to realize you're part of the message. So how you communicate is as important as the words you're using. So, if you come across like, I'm kind of bored with this, and I suppose, we do a lot of great things, and I'm giving you a lot of nonverbals here that are so off-putting. There was a study done at UCLA that said that 55% of the believed message on television is nonverbal, your body language. Right. 38% is tone and attitude, so kind of a dismissive tone or arrogant tone. And only 7% is verbal, what you actually say. Yet you watch in governments and elsewhere, all the work goes into preparing the words.
Yeah.
Not realizing that the carrier of the words, the spokesperson, is critically important to the believability. That's why with prime ministers and so on, we have, you can see that in this last election. People will perceive values and benefits of and character traits of, in this case, was Mark Carney versus Pierre Poilievre. And so they're judging it without ever really getting to know them. They're forming an impression. Where are they getting the impression? On their devices that they're seeing the video clips. Well, those clips might be in today as a result of this, that they will form an impression because the visual presentation is a powerful part of the believed message.
Yeah, it's interesting because I guess like the transcripts are there to point back to, but you can't go back and say like, oh, well, he felt this way and he looked this way. Like so it's easy to reference back the words.
Yeah, it is. And I think it's important that, but nowadays, because of the ubiquity of the devices everywhere, now more and more, they're seeing the videos all the time.
Right. Yeah.
You probably wouldn't even make it onto the clip because you didn't have a video. Yeah. So I think that it's become actually more important, not less important. And to your point about business owners, and that's really our target audience here, I guess, that, how you communicate. First of all, you should be as true to yourself as humanly possible. You shouldn't go in there as a fake person pretending to be somebody or not. Right. That's true. So you start off with, who am I as a person? And what am I to my clients? And this is a phrase I thought of decades ago, which was, in the end, my goal is to be a trusted advisor to my clients. A trusted advisor. They're calling you in because they have an issue, problem, concern. They never say, hey, Barry, everything's going great. Come on in and help us. You never get a call like that. But it's like, we have this problem. We have this issue. It's either short-term, long-term. It involves people or involves money, or it implies that it's a problem of the actual issue. So you're helping them think their way through it objectively, but supportively. It's a very interesting blend. Right. You're not telling them, but you're working with them to achieve it. Yeah. And so it is very much an interactive process. And I think people that walk in, I've heard other consultants say, I just go in there and I just tell them. I'm going, ooh, that wouldn't last very long to me. I mean, they probably know a heck of, we did a seminar this morning. My very first words were, you are the experts in this subject matter. We are not. I say we because my partner Laura Peck and I did the seminar. We do a lot of our seminars together. But I'm not an expert in your subject matter. What we can bring to bear is an objective view of it, a process-oriented way. How do you engage that? Help you shaping those messages effectively. That's so we can add value that way. But in the end, we're not here to tell you what you should say.
Right.
So you have to work with people, and you have to know how to truly be a partner to them, a trusted advisor to them. That's really the essence of it.
Yeah. And I mean, that sounds, I'm going to say, good in theory, right? And I guess, like, if we try and get practical here, there's a bit of a dance between having a polished message, but also having that authenticity where the message actually comes from them.
That's right.
So how do you kind of balance the two?
It's a great point. We actually worked on that this morning on this client's issues. We always say, position the issue first. What is this really an issue of to your customers, to your clients? How do you frame that issue in a way that it can be a win-win outcome? So they've got a problem, you've got a, quote, solution, but how do you make that a win-win? How do you make it in a way that they can see the win for them, but also a win for their customers? Right. It's getting them to think through it differently. Think differently about your messages. And I think that that's an important part of this, that they need to understand the power of that message. And I always say, if you go in and you're trying to make government respond to your request, what's the win-win in this one? Not win-lose.
It's for them and you, yeah.
That's right. And so there's different ways of called framing the message, different ways, but it has to be distilled. Eventually people, like we record, of course, video and audio, record our clients in simulated interviews.
Oh, God.
But when you ask the client, in playing that back, do you think you got your message across? And very often they'll do this. You could, maybe if you're an archaeologist trying to excavate it, you might discover it, but it wasn't really obvious. It wasn't obvious. It's not clippable. You're not going to see that on the various outlets. Right. Streamers and everything else, you're not going to see that because it was really so opaque. It was so long. It was so long-winded. So the demand today is actually for tighter and tighter messages. I recall decades ago, people would talk about their 30-second clip. Well, that went out in about 1981. 7 seconds was sort of the standard, but I believe now it's got down to like 3 or 4 seconds. Pretty well. Yeah. Very tight, very sharp.
Yeah. The first on social media, like if you don't have something clear in the first, 1 or 2 seconds, people are swiping away next, and so you have to get that hook right at the beginning and then explain. And that's, that's a very different kind of like way of communicating now.
Absolutely.
Interesting. And I guess you work a lot with like crisis management. Yeah. And to some extent that's exciting. It's kind of cool. Yeah. And so I guess for small business owners, hopefully there's no crisis, right? Nobody wants these crises to occur. Yeah. But if a crisis did occur, what's the first thing that people need to do?
Well, the very first thing is, I sit down with them. You've got to get a feel for, does the client recognize the seriousness of this issue? The implications of it for them. If they're in denial, by the way, many people are in denial.
Right, they don't accept.
Yeah. Well, no, it wasn't really a problem. We solved that. No, that was a. I hear that a lot. It's like, they don't even get that it's a crisis. Yeah. Now, you don't want to tell them you're in trouble, right away. So you have to kind of the way you. I've said to a client, I remember vividly, a very famous one. I said, look, here's what's going to happen here. Let's cut to the chase. The media now have this piece. They're going to be running very soon with that story. You've already denied, you already refused to talk to them. So they're getting ready to go, and they did the right thing. They asked you for a comment, and you refused to give any. So option one is they're going to run with the story, and you're not even in the story, not available for comment. Or option two is you tell the world, the country, what you have done and what you're doing to fix it or what you're doing to address it. Which one of those two do you prefer? Yeah. They almost always kind of go, well, that second one kind of, yeah. So you get a narrow window to tell your story. Right. So a lot of them don't want to do this. They're advised very poorly, I find, internally, because you don't want to upset the boss. So they tend to, we'll just let this blow over. Yeah, right. Well, that's often a huge mistake. You had a chance to tell the world what you've done. And so we are good at, I don't mind saying, crafting that exact statement. We've done that with school boards. We've done that with CEOs. We've done that with boards of directors. We've done that at universities. Universities get in trouble, as you know. And say, okay, what is the statement? Well, they'll spend a week and a half arguing that one back and forth. You've got to give them the draft. There it is. And let them react to something tangible. Learn that. Now react to that. What's missing in it, what should be in it. And here's my rule of thumb. Don't let lawyers lead the response. Please repeat that. I love lawyers, but they do a special thing. You run it by them before you go with it. A lawyer will tell you, if you say that word, that's going to be a problem. If you put it that way, we now have a legal problem. If you do this, fine, but don't let them lead the response.
Right.
I have learned that from the get-go. And I often say to a lawyer, see, lawyers like to pressure clients. If we don't, then there's going to be litigation, there's going to be liability, you're going to be Okay, you're threatening and pressuring the client. In the end, let the client who has to, the business owner who has to decide for him or herself, I have a much wider thing here. I've got to make sure that the trust of our brand, when we say our medications are safe, and then we're ignoring this thing here, we are hurting our own brand. That's bigger than just a legal issue. I will say a lawyer will help you in the court of law 2 years from now when it comes before the courts. We need to work on the court of public opinion that can have you drawn, quartered, convicted, and run out of town on a rail long before then. Yeah. So my goal actually in a crisis is to say, we're going to end this quickly. The longer this goes on, the more damaging it will be.
Right.
So my goal is not to extend it out for billing purposes, but for let's end this today.
Yeah.
That's really a goal.
Yeah, no, that's fair. And yeah, it's interesting because some people say like, no, don't say any comments, don't explain, let it blow over. But, I guess like your framing is that if you can have your message in there, it helps the article or the journalist have an actual balanced approach, which the journalist is trying to do. They're trying to get a comment. And if you don't give one, it's not going to go your way, right?
That's right.
And so after that initial kind of like, I'm going to say crisis hit, the business owners need to rebuild that trust.
Yeah.
Right. So whatever that situation might be, how do you go about gaining that trust with your employees or your customers after that initial crisis?
That's a great point. First of all, if you were honest, authentic, apologetic for what happened and take ownership of it, take responsibility of it. Lawyers hate that, but you're taking I'm picking on lawyers today. I don't know.
That's okay.
But that you're taking responsibility. It happened under your watch.
Yeah.
That's enough. Even if you didn't know about it, it doesn't absolve you from ultimate responsibility for what happens in your firm. So accept that. It's not a terrible negative to accept that mistakes were made.
Yeah.
And that you're genuinely sorry for it. So I always like to start with that. And I think the other thing is to rebuild. It's a great question you're asking. You have to start with your immediate customers. You have to share with them, your employees and your customers.
Right.
You've got to really engage them, allow them to ask you questions about it. Nowadays, you can do that on virtual calls and so on, but you've got to make sure that everybody gets a full and complete picture of what's going on and then lay out a plan of action for going forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it makes sense what you're saying too. To rebuild that trust, you have to actually take ownership and accountability, and in a way it's easier to say than it is to actually do. And there's every word you're saying has implications in the long term.
Right. There's always a tendency, and I hate to, I'm not going to pick on anybody in particular, but the 3 Ds, dodge, duck, or deny. They'll go for any one of these 3. No, be forthright about it.
Yeah.
Right. I'm telling you, that's the biggest single stumbling block. Because, oh boy, if I admit that, then. So I'm big on, what's the cost of not doing that? You're destroying the brand of your company.
Right.
And I mean, everybody wants to have a brand that is powerful and long lasting. My friend Bruce Firestone had come up with this, that ultimate success is DV. That is the your own demarcated or defined value times Q times quantity equals success. So if you don't have a differentiated, that's really the word, the differentiated value, the DV, then you're just a Me Too company. You're a Me Too company offering Me Too services. So what is your unique brand? Your differentiated value? And I will say to clients, well, ours is that we focus on your issues. We don't do generic things. We do your exact issues and work with you on those.
Right.
So that's one of our differentiated values. And times quantity means how do you quantify that in any way, whether you go on, like we do our pocket tips books and so on. And we try to share that out there so that people realize, boy, this is different. I'd really seen it. I remember when we did our first Communicate with Power pocket tips book called Encountering the Media. And by the way, we're doing a brand new one coming out this fall called Getting Your Message Across in an Age of Uncertainty.
Right.
And we want to have things in there that are sharing, not just keeping that as a secret, and the process, the steps. A lot of people in business want to know, what are the steps you take? They're really big. If you do a slide, they're already taking note of that slide. They want to see the steps you take.
Right, the practical side.
Yeah. So we have a thing called the persuasion ladder, and what are the steps in that persuasion ladder?
Interesting.
And you watch them, they would take a note because they want to see what those steps are. So owners don't want a lot of just bunk and, verbiage. They want to see, give me some tangible tools that I can rely on for, for dealing with these issues. So those are really important to us. That's a differentiated value.
Yeah.
And the quantity is, I remember when we first did the pocket tips, somebody said, well, you shouldn't do that because once they buy it, they won't bother with your seminars. Well, that was a funny way of putting it, but I felt, I think it's important to share these. They are paying for it, the book. So, in the end, it led to more business.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't doubt it. I mean, when you're just talking now about kind of like protecting brand and everything, I can think of the CEO at the Coldplay concert.
Yeah.
And for anybody who doesn't know, Barry has a great Substack that goes through real actual examples, which is very entertaining. I always watch that newsletter. So actual kind of issues, and then actually see what Barry recommends in those situations. So very practical in nature. I guess when it comes to crisis management too, you get a little bit of behind the scenes of very interesting situations, right? And I would say that you're in a unique position to actually have information that a lot of people don't. And so I'm wondering if that's just part of the fun of the job, right? Like you kind of have that thrill.
I'm having fun at your expense. So no, I wouldn't call it fun, but I would say what's an ongoing buzz in the thing is, this is a real person in a real conflict with real stakes attached to it. And what you say to them can make the difference between success and failure, that it gets to that exact crisis point. Yeah. And you can be struggling with people in the room, all well-meaning, who are giving all the disastrously wrong advice. You got to find a way to take them out of play, to deal with the client who has to make his or her own decision, unpressured. So that's important.
Yeah, it's interesting because there's going to be people in the room who have their own opinions, but they probably shouldn't be sharing them because they don't actually know what they're doing, right? And then they're trying to influence the CEO or whoever it is.
You are so right. I remember being in a room with the board, and this guy here is, I said to my real estate lawyer, you know what he told me? So he's pushing back on me. I said, well, when your real estate lawyer has any real experience in crisis communications, please introduce him to me. I'd love to know. I'm not pretending to be a real estate lawyer. He should not pretend to be a crisis communications consultant. He's giving you disastrous advice. Just tell him to go away. These stupid things. It's like, why would you say, I talked to this guy, he's not a cardiologist, but he told me how to handle a heart. He's doing really well. Well, why are you even bringing that up? So I'm just saying that people they'll go to the strangest rationalizations for disastrous advice. So here's the thing I have said jokingly in the past, but there's some truth to this. This is the only profession in the world in which the clients have to keep learning the same lessons over and over again. You would think that would be resolved by now. That CEO of that company who's there with the person he's having an affair with at the Coldplay concert, you'd think that he would have known by now that you are teetering on the brink of a disaster,
Yeah.
not just for you, by the way, but for your company.
Yeah.
And your board of directors has an obligation ultimately to the shareholders, not to be toady to you, but ultimately to make a decision on the best interest of this company and the shareholders, and they're going to make that decision. And either you make it right now or they will make it for you. That's the reality of a lot of those things.
Yeah.
So you do it in a nice way. I remember a university president got in trouble, let's just say, and the board calls me in. What do we do? What do we say? Those are the two questions anybody asks you. What do we do? What do we say? And can you tell us right now, please? Because
in the next 10 minutes.
So I remember they wanted, that's the end of that president. And I said, you know what? It's pretty brutal and cold to just fire him. Let's sit down with him. And the message is we're no longer no longer on the same page about what's going on in this university going forward. And so we've had to make a very difficult but necessary decision. Let's make this jointly. Let's make this joint statement that we both have agreed to part company. Overwhelmingly, they buy that. Because if they don't, the next thing is, well, unfortunately, we're going to have to fire you publicly. And you're not going to look good in that. It can be very damaging to your career going forward. We don't want to damage your career. So those are statements that are developed in order to say that. And by the way, in the end, when they are faced with it, there's a lot of truth to that. They realize we are not on the same page at all. So that often it's pulling out of the situation something that can be something. We started using that phrase, win-win. What's the win-win out of this in a terrible situation? Nobody wants to fire the president of a university.
Yeah.
But we've seen that happen in a few different cases across North America, really. And it's not a pleasant situation. But somebody has to take hold and make a decision. And you're helping them make the right decision in the right way.
Yeah. And the president might be a good fit for a different university.
Correct.
Or a college or whatever.
That's a really good point.
And so you have to kind of like acknowledge that during those messages. Yeah. I guess a lot of the business owners we're working with here have, I'm going to say, younger employees, kind of the Gen Z, millennials. They have their own way of communicating, right? So very different audience. What are some of the tactics that business owners can use to, I guess, be a little bit transparent and purposeful in their business and communication, right? Because from my understanding, millennials, Gen Zs are a little bit more interested in that kind of like purpose-driven organization, that transparency. Wondering if you had any kind of tips and tricks for us.
Well, first, I probably wouldn't say they want to be a little bit transparent. They want you to be fully transparent. But somebody has to pull back a little bit because once I go into that, I'm now into another whole set of problems that I can't control anymore. So there are certain disciplines attached to this. However, to the word transparent, those are important value themes. I think Gen Z are very much into the values guiding all of this. And they may not be predictable sometimes in what their views of things are. But if you don't understand your employees, the culture, it's really the culture of the organization. I mean, in every sector, there are different cultures. You can walk in the room and sense and feel that. We were with an Indigenous group this morning, and walking right in the room, you can see, feel the different culture. It's not just the artifacts on the wall and everything else, but it's a culture in the room. And I was born in Ireland. I mean, so I'm walking in there very respectful of it, but learning. And I always say, look, I'm going to learn more from you probably than you learn from me. Oh, great. Can we cut that check? No. But really, you have to go in a learning, understanding, and listening mode. They want to know you're listening to them. So Gen Z want to know, are you even listening to us?
Right.
And they don't expect you to be perfect. But if you've made a mistake, you better fess up, cough up, because we're all going down with the ship if you don't do this right. So there's a certain fear factor. And don't forget, they're younger, may not have life experience necessarily. So it's hard to get context around things. There can be a panic mode if you don't make them your priority, starting with your own employees. Let's sit down and talk this all the way through. The best CEOs are when they sit on a stool, there's no script, there's no PowerPoint. They sit there and let's have an honest conversation of what's going on here. They really like that.
Right.
And then listen. If you're not listening twice as much as you're talking, you've missed the balance of the whole thing.
Yeah, that like raw kind of like authenticity of like just being present and trying to integrate what they're saying into your own message. And
that's right.
That's interesting.
Yeah, well said.
And I guess, obviously business owners have to deliver bad news sometimes. Like it just happens, whether that's layoffs, whether that's closing groups down or just whatever the changes in policy. are there any tips and tricks for business owners to actually deliver those bad news without losing the morale of the team?
Yeah. They always say get the disappointment message, get the failure message out early, not gradually build up to it.
Oh, I see.
If you're going to let them go, don't make that the final sentence of your whole thing. You've got to be able to say that somewhat earlier in it. We've had to make some very difficult but necessary decisions for the survival of this company. So that's a setup line.
Yeah.
Therefore, we've had to take cuts right from the very top all the way through the organization. And they got to feel, are you still getting all your bonuses and all your incredible, are you taking any hit on this?
Yeah.
The senior ranks, are they being affected or they're all benefiting? So I think it's important then that they see there's an equity attached to this. There was a necessity to it, that you genuinely feel very, very badly about this. But that's not enough. Well, okay, we get that. But in the end, what's it going to mean for us? And the second half has to be, and here's what we're going to do to cushion the blow of this. Here's what we're going to do to try to offset some of the pain of this, frankly, and to do our best to help you as well. So I think you have to, it's the sequencing of that is actually very important. The genuineness of it. Reading it into a teleprompter, when Tiger Woods did his thing years ago, he looked like he was a captive, by some foreign terrorist organization, and he had to give this statement. It just wasn't authentic and real. And I think you have to ensure that the values of the organization it's not being done in contrast to them. That in the end, this one thing you can't control is a market. You can control a lot of things in terms of that, but in the end, there was an overwhelming thing that has occurred here. You got to tell them how and why.
Yeah.
So we always say there's sort of three categories of messaging. The what message is action. What action are you taking? The why message is motive. Why are you doing this? Just to get more money for the shareholders. That's all we're doing. You get that, don't you? No, wrong. And then the so what message is, what are the benefits, implications of having taken this action? So what, why, so what, I often call it.
Yeah.
And you've got to be able to, if somebody said to you, they're going to give a speech, you have to get up there at the end of this, I should have told you, we're going to expect remarks from you. Whoa.
What?
So I know what I'm going to be doing. What, why, so what? Here's what we've been doing over the years. Here's why we've been doing it. And here are really the implications of that, and it's kept us going. So that gives structure. People love structure in informal remarks. They feel that you've given some thought to it. And I always use the power of three. Keep it to three. What are the 3 points you want to make?
Yeah, don't drag it on.
Don't drag it on. Oh, boy. So I think it is important we all say, a bad speech doesn't improve with length. So people can't help themselves. They want to talk their way out of that foxhole. Okay, you're in it. Stop talking. So there are very basic things here that keep coming back as reminders. And it is important that, look, everybody can learn and everybody can be better. There's no question. If you're not cognizant of that, then you're way too arrogant because you think you've got it all. No. Yeah. And you invest time and effort and work. I put a lot of time into prepared remarks. I really do. I put hours into them.
Right.
And I try not to wing it. Now, wing it can happen to you, though. You can suddenly get thrown it. But I think it's important to realize that even though not everything has to be a scripted speech, and I think there's less and less requirement for that, but it's got to be crisp. So if you're in a panel discussion, you're blathering on. See, some of these panel discussions never work out because it's just like one monologue after another, and there's time for a few questions from the audience. Boring.
Right.
Get those off the top, a few minutes each, and let's get to the engagement with the audience.
Right.
I think that's really important. But being crisp in response, I always say, if you can't respond to that in 30 seconds, you probably don't have much of a response. You're just talking.
Yeah.
So these are all important little lessons.
Yeah. No, that's trying to keep your message short, trying not to let your speeches go on and on. And I love that. That's interesting. And we're talking about having to deliver bad news and how, there's difficult times sometimes and the uncertainty. You said you had your work that you're doing with dealing with uncertainty, right?
Yeah.
And so what do you think that business owners should do in times of uncertainty, right? It can be very difficult because they have information privately that they can't share with the team or with other people. but they have to get a certain message across. So I think what you explained in the first case where you're saying the bad news and the reason why and so what, but sometimes you can't actually share that information, right?
Yeah. Well, that's a good one. I think uncertainty really, we're all in uncertainty. We have tariff barriers that fly up and causes tremendous problems in terms of selling your products. Everything now purchased from the United States will have a tariff attached to it and vice versa. Boy, we weren't planning on this. So a lot of it's unplanned. But you have to go to true north. What are our values in this organization? What guides us as we make our decisions? Do we fold up shop because there's a challenge, or do we find new markets? You can see this government here, the federal government in Canada, that they're going to that approach. They want to create new markets. They want to create new distribution channels. They want to invest heavily in infrastructure. We took a lot of things for granted for years. Hey, hop in the truck, bring it an hour across the border, you're done. Well, suddenly that's no longer the market. We got used to that for 85% of our exports. So it's like, how do you can't create things on a dime. It's going to take time, but you need to tell people where you're going. Like, I think it's important for every prime minister and every premier of a province to say, where are we going with all this? Are you just making it more uncertain? How do we trust that you are going to make the right decisions for the right reasons on behalf of us, not just behalf of you? That's, they always say, trust is earned. So we used that word before, but you're earning trust. And you take away from the trust when you start, not so much disappointing, but maybe contradicting or taking away that you've lost their trust because you said one thing and did another.
Yeah, you skewed from your message.
Right. So I think every business owner has to say, look, over time, am I really building trust or am I taking away from it? I'm removing myself from it because I seem to be contradicting all the time. So I think it's important to realize it's earned over time, and why reputation management is so important in our business is that it can be lost in a moment. So you've got to realize that you have to earn that every day. So I think it's coming back to informing people, keeping them abreast of change, tell them what you're doing, tell them the goal of what you're doing, ask and what is their role in this journey that we're in together. I think increasingly today, people want to feel, are we really in this together? And you see a lot of CEOs of large corporations doing their best to be seen to be engaging with their employees. They're not just behind this, office on the top floor in which you have to make these formal appointments, that they're really very much more engaged. You're seeing a big cultural shift at the C-suite level. But even for small business out there, are you really engaging your customers? Like, I love it. If I'm in a restaurant, the owner comes over and says, hi, how's it going? That alone makes me a much more, somebody that's going to want to come back there.
Yeah.
So I think that openness, authenticity, communicating is really these are critical aspects today of being a small business owner, being a leader.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, lots to take in from that. All right. I had two kind of questions I wanted to talk about when it comes to technology in the future here. So AI is a big topic, right? And especially in, I'm going to say, communications or in writing, AI can be used for writing speeches and to polish communication. What are your thoughts on this?
Okay. I don't want to be anti-AI. It's there. It's a reality. AI does several things extremely well. Will never be replicated by a human being. And that is give instant structure to complex things. They're really good at the structure of it.
Interesting.
Give me that plan, roll it out. Now, but looking at the content, highly questionable at times. Oh, that would be disastrous. I've actually tried it out, testing out a speech. Oh man, there'll be clangers in there. In Hollywood, they call that on the nose writing. You're just being too obvious about it. It's insulting to the audience to do that. They will read into what you're saying. And there are, musical geniuses that have figured out it's really the subtext of the lines. And no way is AI going to have subtext. So when Gordy Lightfoot wrote, is the ice still in the river? Are the old folks still the same? And by the way, did she mention my name? See, I've always loved that because it's supposed to be, oh, by the way, but you know darn well the entire purpose of that conversation was to find out about her.
Yeah.
And so Gordon Lightfoot understood that, and he's one of the great songwriting geniuses, really of the past 50 years. But I come back to even in speech writing, don't hit them over the head with it.
Yeah.
They're smart enough they can read in.
Yeah.
You can read into it. So this comes out in almost everything you do, that give AI full marks for structure, for being able to pull together things, but I would not trust it for it's all the fine touch of writing, whether it's an opening statement at a news conference, whether it's a message on a commercial, don't ask it to speak from your heart. You probably won't recognize your heart. So, as I say, don't give all your trust to it, but it can be a step in the right direction.
Yeah, and I find like you said, it's like the last little 10%, right? But also oftentimes that's the beauty of the message, right? That's it. And so if you take that away, it's like, well, technically you did say the things, but like, was it authentic? Was it like kind of like the slight imperfections that make it real and authentic, and you lose a bit of that, and I also find AI doesn't have that good of a sense of humor. So like if you try and put like something witty or humor or whatever, like terrible, you're going to lose it. So, so do you feel like with not just AI, but just the latest technology, whether that's like social media or just, even spell check or whatever, do you feel that technology has helped leaders communicate, or do you feel that it's made them worse communicators?
Well, that's a really good question. Actually, I guess I would say that it enables them to do more. So it helps in quantity.
Gives them an ability, but
correct.
Yeah.
It helps in quantity, but in terms of quality, it should not be your final thing. You could do a quantity, show me what that speech looks like, and then you need to take that and you need to reword that. And we do some, obviously for clients. I got out of speech writing. I did that for quite a number of years, very early on in my career. I prefer not to do a lot of that. It ends up being agony discussions among 3 or 4 people that goes on. So I prefer not to, but I often will do a quick opening statement to a news conference, or I'm pretty specialist in writing apologies on behalf of that agency or organization. Apology writing, here's a specialty for you. But, because it's the nuance of it. It's the wording of that. That's what you need to make sure a human being who understands that owner, who has a feel for the owner's words, is not forcing him or her to be somebody that they're not.
Yeah. And I also feel like in a lot of what you do, or in crisis management, a lot of it comes down to like the current climate of things that are happening, right? Like, so maybe you prepared something, but then like a moment before there's a crisis with a competitor, and then now you have to like kind of shift your message a little bit. And AI isn't up to date to the minute here. Like, and so a professional like yourself or others would be a little bit more in the know of what's going on in the news, to be, not say relevant, but like context appropriate,
Yes, but it can change rapidly. I mean, the Jimmy Kimmel controversy is a very good example that he gets a news, in the writer's room, and I've been in writers' rooms where they get a thing, this guy that killed Charlie Kirk, maybe he was part of the MAGA. It looks like he's from a MAGA family. And there was actually an early report that indicated that. So they jumped on that for comedic purposes. Ooh. Turns out an hour later, actually, no, that was wrong. Now, he's just put that into play, and it's definitely wrong.
Yeah.
So now it blew up into this incredible controversy involving the ABC and everything else. So don't just count on, just because you saw something quickly flash on your device, doesn't mean it's true, and you have to weigh carefully. If we get into that, we may not be able to get back out of it again because we don't actually know. We've not been able to confirm that. So a lot of people are doing conversations, not realizing it hasn't even been confirmed yet, and you're speaking as if it has.
Yeah.
So even though I was actually very sympathetic to the situation that Jimmy Kimmel got himself into, nevertheless, you can see that was one of the building blocks of a problem right there. Maybe hold back on certain things because he had enough other information. He had not great video clips that pretty well told the story for him anyway. So not that you ever want to make fun of a death. We've done, because my background in comedy, one of the phrases that's used in comedy, if you bring up somebody and somebody has died, especially in a very tragic circumstance like that, and if you make a joke about it, you'll hear a silence in the audience, and then the comedian will lean into the mic. Too soon? Yeah, it was too soon.
Yeah.
So even bringing it up
Yeah.
can actually be the problem in and of itself. And it doesn't have to be fair. It doesn't have to be, is that worth destroying an entire show and career, et cetera? No, but it's an emotionalized reaction. So people's emotions are high. So again, all part of advice to clients is, we need to kind of be cautious in that. We need to kind of not go there.
Yeah.
Let's stay more over here.
Yeah.
That's part of your outside advice.
Yeah, and it's tough because for late night talk shows, they're expected to be, talking about the things that are in the news, even if it's a sensitive topic, right? So they're kind of expected to talk about it, but then they can get into some issues when they do, And on the topic of AI as well, the other thing that I've noticed too is that AI is not very good at figuring out the truth of a message. So for example, just because a website says something, they don't add more or less weight because the website said it, or if it was a news agency, or if it was a sales marketing agency or whatever, So they write their message disregarding the level of, I guess, authority of the sources.
Yeah, you're so right. I mean, we should not expect, I don't care the magic of machine learning, but don't expect them actually to replace a human being. And unfortunately, you're already seeing that movement.
Yeah.
We can cut down the number of people we're hiring to do the communication. No, actually, careful about that. Because the communications advisor should look at that, weigh it carefully, and say, you know what? Let's cut that, move to this. That's what a good communications advisor does, internally or externally. And so I'm here to fight for human beings doing a heavy load of this rather than some machine.
Yeah, no, that's fair. And I guess maybe a question I can ask is a big picture here, right? There's going to be some business owners who are listening to this and you're like, well, I'm just not a good communicator. And is there still a place for bad communicators to still succeed as business leaders?
What a good question. There was the head of a car company. I mean, I'm talking Studebaker days. Studebaker, I was a young kid. And there was a guy that was the president of Studebaker, as I recall. And he went on television. He did his own commercials. And I thought, wonder why. But I saw why. Hi there, folks. I guess you might have heard of me before. I'm the guy that runs Studebaker. And let me tell you something from my own experience. When I get in that car, okay, so he's talking like this, and I'm thinking, now if in the normal world of, I think we need to kind of get a professional spokesperson in there. But it was the authenticity of him that connected with people.
Right.
People admired that it was the real person. Terrible voice, cranky, looks like a cranky old guy, but it worked for him. Yeah. It was authentic.
Right.
So that's something to keep in mind. Your authenticity is your greatest value. And don't be somebody you're not. Now, I've had the odd person say to me, well, people say that, I should just be myself. And you're in the middle of a crisis. You have to say, that's part of the problem. You are being yourself, So we're going to have to rein that in, because some people are there, you're not a good judge actually of your own. It's hard to look at yourself objectively.
Right.
You need outside perspective. Yeah. How's that coming across to you? How's that coming across to Gen Z? You don't actually know. You need to make sure you understand it. Their perspective on this. Yeah. I just tell people this. I'm going right away. Boy, you are just not a listener. I often say your transmitter's on the whole time. To be a great communicator, be authentic, but have your listener on. 2 ears, one mouth. Use them in proportion, as somebody once said. So you've got to be a great listener. And some of the great leaders I have worked with, both politically and in government and in the private sector. The really good ones are great listeners. They really are listening to you. And I think that's such an important point. And it doesn't get emphasized enough.
Well, so we got to wrap this up here, but let's kind of put a bow on all of this. And maybe I can ask you, if it boiled down to one big concept, one big skill, what would be the make or break for business owners to be able to lead in their role?
I think it's seek to understand. That famous...
The curiosity, the
famous prayer, seek to understand rather than, I want to be understood, okay? Wrong goal altogether. No. Seek to understand. A market changes. Do you understand that? The world has changed. Do you understand that? Customer preferences have changed. Do you understand that? How do you not? My transmitter's on the whole time. I don't need to listen to them. I just know. People tell me, wow. Okay, so right there, I would say the number one is really your goal is ongoing understanding. I mean, what I know today versus 40 years ago when we started the business are really night and day. Why? Because for a living, but my natural instinct and interests are in understanding. I remember thinking when I was 9 years old, I was watching, friends of my parents. And I remember thinking to myself, does that father really understand that he's being so obnoxious? Like, does he understand? I used to think that. Never verbalize it, but I would think it like, doesn't he get that he's just so obnoxious? I remember thinking if he understood that, he would change. I don't know if that's true. I'm a very naive 9-year-old, but I remember being curious, and I'm still curious about, do people really want to understand? The really good ones do. And the world changes, and so should you. But it doesn't mean your values have to change. It doesn't mean what's profoundly important to you should change. But the way you frame it, the way you message it, the way you approach it, those will change by being a great listener.
Interesting. Yeah. Asking those questions, getting the context, getting kind of that balanced approach so that you can still have your own opinion.
Yep.
But at least you understand the greater context to kind of sprinkle that in or to, that makes sense. Okay, great. Well, I think we're running out of time here. Would be good to kind of know if people want to get a hold of you, if people want to kind of stay in touch and follow your story here.
Well, we have a Substack called Communicate with Power, Barry McLaughlin's Substack, Communicate with Power. We have podcasts on there with my partner, Laura Peck, and I. Also, we have our company website, TLC, transformleaders.com. And coming up, looking forward to the launch of a brand new series of Communicate with Power Pocket Tips, and that is called Getting Your Message Across in an Age of Uncertainty. We look forward to launching that, and please keep that in mind. Love to hear from you, by the way. We love getting questions and happy to give you whatever our responses are to those. We'd be happy to give that effort. So thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you, Eric.
Yeah, of course. This is great. Well, thanks, Barry, for joining us. I think this was really insightful. I learned a bunch. I'm sure we'll have lots of comments on this one. So, again, thank you so much, Barry, for your time.
My pleasure. Really my pleasure. Thank you.